They called their love treason, but together they started a revolution. They called their love treason long before either of them dared to speak it aloud, for in the fractured galaxy ruled by the iron fist of the Concord, humanity was a subject race newly bound in chains, its worlds taxed and its fleets dismantled, its people conscripted as laborers and soldiers in the wars of others, and on the jewel world of Vela, seat of the Concord's high council and throne of its royal line, a human soldier named Marcus was assigned not as a warrior, not as a commander, but as a ceremonial guard, a living symbol of conquered humanity's loyalty, placed in polished armor to stand like a statue in the grand palace of marble and crystal where alien nobles whispered and schemed. He hated every second of it, the way they looked at him not as a man but as a trophy, the way they used his presence as proof that humanity had been broken, and yet he endured, because his father had once told him that survival in the face of humiliation was its own act of defiance, and Marcus swore he would survive no matter what the Concord demanded. But that oath began to change the day he first saw her, the alien Princess Arinya, seated upon her throne like a living jewel carved from starlight, her silver-blue skin glowing under the light of the biolamps, her eyes vast and sorrowful like the oceans of her homeworld, her crown heavy upon her brow as though it were a chain of gold rather than a symbol of power. She was every inch the image of royalty, adored and feared, yet when her gaze swept across the hall it lingered for a fraction too long on him, the lone human among aliens, and in that silent glance Marcus saw something he had not expected. A loneliness so profound that it pierced through the layers of pomp and tradition that surrounded her. He told himself at first that it was nothing, that she was simply curious about the oddity of a human in her palace, but the thought haunted him even as he marched the endless halls, even as he endured the sneers of alien nobles who delighted in mocking his kind. Days bled into weeks, and as duty stationed him near her throne, near her processions, near her chambers, he began to notice things no one else seemed to see, the way her smile never reached her eyes, the way she flinched when her uncle, the regent, placed his hand upon her shoulder, the way she sometimes turned her head toward the sky as though imagining flight. And then came the first words, small at first as all forbidden things begin, spoken when she lingered in the palace gardens while he stood guard, his eyes fixed outward though his ears burned at the sound of her voice. "Is it true," she asked, her tone hesitant yet urgent, "that on your world the rain falls freely, not guided by machines?" He nearly broke protocol by turning his head, but he answered softly, "Yes. It falls from the clouds without control. It soaks you whether you want it or not." She fell silent for a long time before whispering, "I would like to feel that." From that night on, questions followed whenever she found herself near him and the watchful eyes of the counselors were elsewhere. She asked about fire, about music, about laughter unmeasured by court etiquette, and Marcus, though cautious, could not stop himself from answering, each word pulling them closer, each word carving a crack into the walls that separated princess from guard, alien from human, ruler from subject. He told her of the forests of earth, the smell of soil after rain, the taste of roasted grain cooked over flames, and though her expression remained regal, her eyes lit with wonder, as though she had been starved for such simplicity. Over weeks and then months their exchanges grew bolder, stolen moments in the palace corridors or hidden alcoves, where her questions turned softer, more personal, and his answers became confessions. He admitted he hated his post, that he despised being paraded like a conquered animal, and she confessed in turn that she despised her crown, that the throne she sat upon felt less like power and more like chains forged from gold. "They call me princess," she whispered once in the shadows of the marble stairwell, "but I am their prisoner as much as you are yours." He should have said nothing, should have turned away, but Marcus could not stop the words that escaped him. "Then perhaps we are prisoners together." The silence that followed was not empty but charged, and when she lifted her eyes to his, he saw a fire there that matched his own, and in that moment the world seemed to tilt. They touched hands in the gardens under the artificial starlight one night, a touch so fleeting it could have been mistaken for an accident, but both knew it was not, and though no words passed between them, something irreversible had begun. He returned to his barracks that night trembling, knowing that if discovered, he would be executed for daring to touch her, and yet he could not bring himself to regret it. For her part, Arinya stared at her reflection in her chamber mirror, her crown mocking her from her head, and whispered to herself that for the first time in her life she had touched something real. Rumors began soon after, as they always do in palaces, whispers carried by servants and soldiers that the princess lingered too long where the humans stood guard, that her eyes strayed toward him in council chambers, that perhaps the tales of her cold detachment were lies. The regent noticed, and though he said nothing, his suspicion hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Marcus tried to distance himself, tried to quell the fire burning inside him, but Arinya defied him with quiet bravery, appearing in the places she knew he must stand, slipping him questions with her gaze that no one else would notice, until finally, one night, when the stars burned bright over Vela and silence cloaked the palace, she came to him in secret, her crown abandoned, her eyes wet with tears. She told him she could not live chained to a throne, that she could not endure being a symbol while her people suffered under her regent's cruelty, that she had found something in him she had never found in any noble suitor: honesty, freedom, choice. And then she whispered the words that shattered his resolve entirely: "I don't want a throne. I want you." His heart pounded as he tried to deny her, tried to remind her of the danger, of the death that awaited them both, but she silenced him with her hand against his chest, and he could not resist her any longer. He kissed her there in the shadow of the garden's silver trees, a kiss that burned like fire and sealed their fates. It was a death sentence, he knew, for the Concord did not forgive treason, and love between human and royal blood was treason in its purest form. Yet as her arms wrapped around him and her tears touched his lips, Marcus knew he would rather die for that kiss than live forever without it. And so their love, born in shadows, sealed in defiance, began not as a rebellion but as something far simpler, two souls reaching for each other in a world that would never allow it. But even they could not know what power they had unleashed, for in empires built on chains and fear, even the smallest act of love can be the spark that ignites revolution, and theirs was no small act but treason itself, a flame that once lit would spread until the stars themselves burned with its fire. The weeks that followed blurred into one long stretch of secrecy, tension, and stolen moments as the human soldier and the alien princess found themselves caught between their growing bond and the crushing weight of their respective worlds. For every meeting they managed was a gamble, every word exchanged behind closed doors a risk that could cost them not just their lives but the fragile possibility of peace between their peoples. And yet neither could let go, for what had begun as hesitant dialogue had turned into a current pulling them deeper into something undeniable, the kind of connection that defied political lines, military ranks, and ancient prejudices. And it was in those stolen hours that they began to hatch the first threads of what would later be called the Revolution, though at the time it was nothing more than two hearts refusing to bend beneath the weight of empires, for the alien princess confessed to him that her throne was a prison disguised as a seat of power, chained by expectations, treaties, and the unyielding laws of her people that demanded she marry for alliances, not for love, and worse still, that her council of elders watched her every move, waiting for the slightest misstep to declare her unfit to rule, while the soldier, bound by the iron discipline of his fleet, knew that fraternizing with the enemy was treason punishable by execution, a blade that hovered over his neck each time he chose to walk toward her instead of away. But he found that he could not stop, and neither could she, and the fire that had been lit in their first encounter only grew as they found themselves sharing not just words but secrets, dreams, and eventually strategies, for what began as confessions soon became plans, whispered ideas about how things could change if only someone dared to act. If only someone dared to say no to centuries of hatred and endless war, and slowly, dangerously, the two of them began to realize that their love was no longer just personal defiance, it was the seed of something larger, something that could reshape the galaxy itself. It was the alien princess who first suggested that their bond could become more than rebellion against circumstance, that it could become a weapon, for she knew the weaknesses of her empire's rule, the cruelty inflicted upon the lower castes, the resentment festering in the colonies crushed under alien taxation and military occupation, and she whispered to him in the quiet of her chambers that these were cracks waiting for a hammer blow, that if her people could see her stand with a human not as enemy but as equal, it would shatter the lies that had bound them for generations. And though fear trembled in her voice, fire blazed in her eyes, and the soldier, hardened by years of war, felt something he had not in a long time: hope, raw and dangerous, yet bright enough to cut through the despair of endless battles. For he had seen his own world bleed under alien invasions, seen families torn apart, children orphaned, entire cities reduced to dust, and yet here was the daughter of that very empire daring to dream of peace, daring to place her life in his hands, and it was then that he knew their love was already treason. But if it was treason to fight for something better, then so be it, and together they began to plan in earnest, laying the foundations of the revolution not with armies and weapons but with faith, trust, and the conviction that change was worth any price. Their meetings grew more daring, taking place not only in secret chambers but in forgotten corridors of the alien palace, on quiet balconies that overlooked the endless sprawl of the capital city where neither guards nor counselors thought to look, and sometimes in hidden tunnels carved long ago as escape routes for rulers who feared assassination. And it was in these dark passages that they spoke freely, voices low but hearts unbound, And it was here that they decided their next move, for they could not keep their love forever in the shadows, not if they truly wished to spark a fire. And so the alien princess proposed a risk so great that even the soldier hesitated, to reveal themselves not in the halls of power where her enemies waited to tear her down, but to the people themselves, to show them with their own eyes what was possible, for no propaganda, no decree, no council vote could erase the truth of a human and alien standing side by side, defying hatred, declaring unity, and the soldier, though his military training screamed against it, found himself agreeing, because deep down he knew revolutions were not born in whispers but in moments that could not be forgotten, and this would be such a moment. Their chance came sooner than either expected when the alien princess was scheduled to appear at a public festival, a grand event meant to display the strength of the empire, its wealth, and its unshakable dominance over the galaxy. And though the council intended it as a show of power, she saw it as the perfect stage, a place where the oppressed and the free alike gathered, where every eye would be upon her. And she told him that this would be the moment, that he would stand at her side not as prisoner or emissary but as equal, and together they would let the people see what the rulers most feared. And though the soldier knew that such a move would mark them both for death, he also knew it was the only way forward, for there was no turning back now. Their love had already crossed the line of no return, and so they prepared in silence, their every heartbeat carrying the weight of treason, their every glance heavy with the knowledge that the next dawn could be their last. When the day of the festival arrived, the city thrummed with life, banners of the alien empire unfurling across the skies as fleets of warships glided overhead in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the sun, symbols of power meant to awe the masses, and the streets below swelled with citizens, soldiers, merchants, and slaves alike, all gathered to witness the spectacle. And as the alien princess emerged from her palace adorned in ceremonial robes, jewels glittering upon her brow, the crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the towering spires of the capital. But hidden beneath the finery her heart hammered with fear and anticipation, for she knew today she would either be remembered as a traitor or a liberator. And when her eyes found the soldier waiting in the shadows at the edge of the stage, his face hard but his gaze steady, she felt strength flood her veins, and without hesitation she reached for him, pulling him into the light before the stunned eyes of her people. Gasps rippled through the crowd, shock freezing the air as the alien princess stood tall, her hand clasped with that of a human soldier, her voice ringing out with a clarity that cut through the silence, and she declared before all that love was not treason, that unity was not weakness, and that the future belonged not to those who clung to war but to those who dared to believe in peace. And as her words echoed across the square, the counselors watching from their balconies turned pale with fury, guards raised their weapons and murmurs surged among the people, some outraged, some fearful, but many more filled with wonder, for never before had they seen such defiance, never before had they seen their princess reject the chains of tradition. And though danger pressed upon them from every side, the moment was already eternal, a spark that could not be extinguished, for it was there in that square that the first cries of revolution began to rise, faint at first, then swelling louder, until the city trembled with voices shouting not for war or empire but for freedom. And in that deafening roar the soldier and the alien princess knew that they had done more than risk their lives. They had lit the fire that would burn across the stars. The square erupted into chaos the moment the alien princess clasped the human soldier's hand, for what began as gasps of shock turned swiftly into shouts of outrage, fear, and defiance. And though the counselors screamed for guards to seize her, though soldiers pressed forward with weapons gleaming, though propaganda drones circled overhead recording every instant to twist it into treason, nothing could erase the image already burned into the eyes of the people, their ruler standing unafraid beside the sworn enemy of their empire, not as master and prisoner but as equals bound by something far stronger than fear. And in that instant the first true cries of rebellion broke free, carried by voices that had been silenced for too long, swelling into a chant that shook the city's foundations. And yet as the roar of the crowd built, the alien princess knew the moment was only the beginning, that what came next would decide whether their flame of defiance was crushed beneath the boot of the empire or fanned into a fire that could consume the stars. Guards rushed forward, disciplined, relentless. But the human soldier moved with the instinct of war, intercepting blows, disarming attackers, standing between her and death with the unshakable ferocity of a man who had already chosen his fate. And together they fought their way free of the stage, darting through alleys and hidden tunnels, the princess guiding him with knowledge of every secret passage while the soldier kept her shielded, his body bleeding but his resolve unbroken, for he had made a vow to protect her, not as a duty of war but as a promise of love. And though the empire declared them traitors, though the fleet mobilized to hunt them, They knew their defiance had been witnessed by thousands, and no power in the galaxy could erase what had been seen. Word spread faster than the Empire could contain it, whispered in the marketplaces, sung in the slums, carried by smugglers across the stars, stories of a princess who dared to stand with her enemy, of a soldier who defied execution to hold her hand. And in those stories truth and hope became inseparable, for the oppressed saw not scandal but salvation, not weakness but courage. And across the Empire sparks began to glow in the darkness, small at first, but growing with each retelling until colonies long ground beneath alien rule dared to lift their heads, dared to believe change was possible, dared to prepare for rebellion. The council raged, branding her a traitor, vowing to bring her back in chains, declaring the human soldier a war criminal whose death was to be broadcast across every channel, and fleets were dispatched to scour the stars for them. Yet no matter how many ships darkened the skies, they could not catch the revolution that now lived in every whisper, every secret meeting, every hand that reached for another across once forbidden lines. For what the rulers did not understand was that revolutions are not built on weapons alone but on the hearts of those who refused to bow, and hers had already been given to him as his had been to her, and nothing could undo that. Their love became the rallying cry of a movement, not because they sought it but because others chose it for them, because in their defiance people found themselves reflected, saw the possibility of a world not carved by fear but by unity, and soon cells of resistance rose, hidden armies forming not in barracks but in the streets, the farms, the factories, humans and aliens alike training in secret, stockpiling weapons, preparing for the day when whispers would become war. And though the soldier had never sought to lead, though the princess had never wanted to ignite rebellion, together they became its heart, the figures upon whom all hopes now rested. Nights they once spent in stolen secrecy became nights spent drafting plans, forming alliances with smugglers, deserters and outcasts, building networks across systems where neither empire nor fleet could silence them. And with each passing day the cost grew higher, for skirmishes broke out, blood was shed, villages burned, yet for each life taken more voices rose to take their place, and the movement only spread, fed by the image of two souls who had chosen love over hate. The Empire struck back with cruelty, razing entire districts suspected of harboring rebels, dragging innocents into prisons, broadcasting executions to instill fear, but instead of breaking the people it only hardened their resolve, for each act of violence was measured against the courage of their princess, against the unyielding loyalty of the soldier who stood beside her, and people asked themselves why they should continue bowing to rulers who burned their lives when love itself had chosen to rise. At last the war became inevitable, not in hidden cells or whispered meetings but on open fields, in orbiting skies, where fleets clashed and armies marched, and it was in this firestorm that the alien princess and the human soldier stood at the center, not commanding from palaces or war rooms but fighting side by side, her voice rallying the broken, his strength holding the line when it faltered. And though the Empire brought its full might to bear, though it unleashed weapons that tore worlds and burned stars, the revolution endured, for hope is harder to kill than flesh, and each victory however small rippled across the galaxy, weakening the grip of tyranny. It was during the final battle, when the Empire's flagship descended to crush the last bastion of resistance, that their love was tested most, for the counselors offered her a choice, promising mercy if she abandoned the human, promising restoration if she denounced him, but she spat in their faces, declaring that she would rather burn with him than rule without him. And in that moment the soldier stepped forward, battered and bloodied, yet with a fire in his eyes brighter than any fleet's weapons, and together they faced the Empire's might, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as two souls who had chosen to defy the world. The battle raged for hours, skies alight with fire, ground soaked with blood, and though the revolution's forces were outnumbered, they fought with a ferocity born not of duty but of love, of belief, of something greater than themselves. And when at last the flagship fell, when its great shadow broke apart and rained fire into the seas, a cry rose from every throat, not just of victory but of freedom, a cry that swept across the galaxy, carried on every wave, every whisper, until no one could deny it. The Empire had fallen, toppled not by armies alone but by two hearts who refused to bow. In the aftermath, when the fires burned low and the dead were mourned, the alien princess and the human soldier stood before their people, no longer fugitives, no longer traitors, but leaders of a new dawn, and with voices steady though heavy with loss they declared not conquest but unity, not vengeance but peace, and the people, weary of war, embraced it, for they had seen too much blood, too much hatred, and now they longed for something better, something brighter, and in the faces of the princess and the soldier they found it. Years later, when songs were sung of the revolution, when children asked how the galaxy had changed, the answer was always the same, that it began with treason, that it began with love, that it began with a princess and a soldier who dared to stand together when the world told them it was impossible, and from that impossible choice came freedom. They had been called traitors, they had been hunted and reviled, but in the end their names were carved not in shame but in stone, monuments rising on worlds once divided, forever reminding those who came after that love is the fiercest revolution of all, and though their lives bore the scars of endless battle, though their hands could never forget the weight of war, they faced each dawn together, side by side, and in that unity lay the truest victory, the ending that no empire could ever burn. What?